Good morning. We'll get started here shortly. I see that folks are still joining, so we'll give it just a minute to get everyone in. All right, for those of you just joining, we're just giving folks a little time to pop in before we get started. So I see that that number is still rising. All right, good morning, friends. We are happy that you are joining us on this Thursday, July 1st, to really share some information about House Bill 4545 and to start probably the first of a series of webinars that we will have on House Bill 4545. So we're going to start today with an overview. So I do want to share who is with us today, and so introduce kind of the team that will be facilitating this webinar with me today. So co-facilitating and leading on presentation, we have Dr. Monica Ruiz-Mills. She is our Director of Effective District Practices, playing integral part in helping us ensure that we can respond to questions that are coming in both the chat and the Q&A, and who will likely be our facilitator for a Q&A at the end is Megha Kansra, and she is the Director of System Support and Innovation. Also kind of ensuring that we have a successful webinar for all of you is that we have Nicole Aguirre. She is our Director of Special Projects. We have Grace Wu, a Director here at the agency over Strategic Compensation. And Julie Cole is also joining us from Student Assessment. She is the Director of Policy and Publications. Not seen on the camera is also Eric Marin, and he is a member of our legal team. And so he will be here kind of supporting us internally. Let me just make sure I haven't forgotten anyone that is on here. Great. So before we get started, just some logistical reminders. We are recording this webinar so that you're able to share it with your teams. You're able to revisit any portion that we discussed today. And we're also going to be posting the slides to our webpage later today. We will provide you that webpage did launch this morning. So we do have a dedicated page for accelerated instruction, and that is going to be your go-to place for any information around the implementation of House Bill 4545. So to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Dr. Ruiz-Mills to get us started on some of the content.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here this morning. Just wanted to provide some information and context. The purpose of today is to provide the context as we navigate through the intent of the legislation on how we can best support our students. We will review the guidance and the key components of House Bill 4545 for the upcoming school year. And we will also discuss upcoming sessions on the supports and the resources that we will need to provide to assist you through this implementation. So let's go ahead and move to our agenda. We will begin with the key changes of House Bill 4545 and the new requirements. So the 87th legislature addressed some key areas. House Bill 4545 establishes new requirements for accelerated instruction for students who do not pass the State of Texas Assessments of Academic Readiness, the STAR assessment. The legislation also includes the elimination of grade retention and retesting requirements in grades 5 and 8. And additional supplemental instruction is now required for all students who did not pass the STAR assessments. So to clarify, because we have been receiving questions regarding what passing is and who receives accelerated instruction, students in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and students who did not pass a STAR end of course exam will be required to take the accelerated instruction. House Bill 4545 also established the accelerated learning committees that will be discussed later, but those committees will be for students in grades 3, 5, and 8 who did not pass the STAR math or reading. So let's go ahead and review the retention and retesting requirements. So a student in grades 5 or 8 is no longer required to be retained at the same grade level based on their STAR performance. Therefore, there is no longer a need for the grade placement committee. Under the retesting section, students will now only take one reading and one math assessment. Previously, there were 2 retaking opportunities. Optional STAR end of course exams in Algebra 2 and English 3 will no longer be offered. So this helps us take out or remove the high stakes testing for students in grades 3 through 8. So now let's look at the timeline as to when this goes into effect. So House Bill 4545 immediately went into effect on June the 16th of 2021. The accelerated instruction requirements under House Bill 4545 will begin in this upcoming school year, 21-22 school year. Now, accelerated instruction has been required for many years. House Bill 4545 has just now set parameters in how the accelerated instruction will be provided. So accelerated instruction, again, is for any student who did not pass the STAR in grades 3 through 8 or a STAR end of course assessment. Accelerated instruction will begin this year, starting in the fall or in the subsequent summer. And this means any student that did not pass, meaning they did not score at the approaches level and were in the did not meets category, are the ones who qualify for this accelerated instruction. Accelerated instruction also entails either assigning a classroom teacher who is a certified master, exemplary, or recognized teacher, or delivering supplemental instruction such as tutoring before or after school or embedded in the school day and meeting all of the House Bill 4545 requirements, which we'll go into more detail in a moment. Also, the LEAs must adopt their policies for parents to contest the content or implementation of educational plans developed by accelerated learning committees. This would fall most likely under your local board FNG policy for student-parent complaints. Finally, we want everyone to understand that LEAs must develop or ensure that there is a process for parents to request the teacher placement. Ms. Ridgway, next slide, please. So we do have a couple of questions that did come in prior to the webinar. And the first one is, when may a parent request a teacher? So let's take a look at this question and think through it. House Bill 4545 establishes that a parent or a guardian has the right to request a particular teacher for their student. And to better manage staffing and scheduling, it is recommended that this be looked at the start of the school year. So during the summer, we should also be reviewing our end of course and STAR assessments to determine where student placement needs to occur. So this would also help facilitate in determining that parent request. But also note that as you have your process that you follow for parents to request such a change, that there really is no concurrent right to have the request granted. TEA recommends, though, that LEAs offer parents and guardians the opportunity to request a different teacher over the summer. Mega, do we have any additional questions?
Yes, we do. We have a good question coming in from a few folks about how to account for students who actually didn't take the Spring STAR test. So Monica, Lizette, would you two like to give an answer to that question?
We actually have that as a Q&A coming up in the next
Perfect.
section. So we will definitely include that one.
Perfect. We'll hang tight on that one then. And just, I'm hearing a little bit of a clarifying question here as well in terms of what is encompassed in parent grievances. I believe we're getting to that question a little bit further as well.
Yes, so the parent grievance is the FNG local policy where parents can file their grievance at the level 1, and that will address during the specific time frame what that concern is. So if a parent does not feel confident, and Ms. Ridgway will discuss this regarding the Accelerated Learning Committee or the Accelerated Instruction, they could go through that process.
Yeah, and we have been in contact with TASB and speaking to a representative from them, and they will also kind of be releasing some guidance on that to support districts in kind of the adoption of any policies or any revisions to their policies in preparation for next fall.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Lizette to discuss the Accelerated Learning Committees.
Great. All right, Accelerated Learning Committees, we're going to kind of start to unpack this a little bit and talk a little bit about who that applies to. And so we're going to go kind of slowly and kind of methodically through this section. For those of you that have read the bill, you know, we encourage all of you to read House Bill 4545. We have extracted kind of the most important parts and the parts that are more time critical for districts right now when they think about planning and the development of any new systems that are necessary for next fall. So for Accelerated Learning Committees, or ALCs for short right now, is they are required for any student in 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade. So if you think about who were required to have committee meetings in the past, those were our grade placement committees. This is a change in language and a refinement in what kind of the policies and procedures are around these types of committee meetings to really address the needs and the additional supports needed for these students. So that's really who we need to be thinking about providing the Accelerated Learning Committee discussions for. So that would be kind of an action item for a district and specifically for a campus, is ensuring that they have, they know exactly who the students are that have not been successful on the 3rd or 5th or 8th grade STAR, and that would be specifically in the areas of math and reading. When you talk about what is going to be discussed in a committee meeting, it's going to be the development of an educational plan. And that plan would need to ensure that it is started in the subsequent school year. Because we're in a transitional phase, and it's what Dr. Ruiz-Mills just talked about, we are recommending that districts really kind of start those discussions about who is going to be on the Accelerated Learning Committees on the campuses, who's going to be, and kind of who are the students that are required to have educational plans that are developed in an Accelerated Learning Committee. But those committee meetings and kind of the finalization of those processes would begin in the fall. Best practice would say probably get it started in the summer, but we realize that some of this might be new for districts, and so we want to ensure that it is starting in the fall. The kind of the meat of what needs to be in that educational plan is really identifying what are the supports, what are the resources that that student is going to need that we're going to outline in this educational plan in order for that student to be successful to perform at the appropriate grade level the next time that they participate in a state assessment. That educational plan must be documented. It must include progress monitoring and kind of a sequencing or a cadence in which they were reporting that progress to the parents. And so ensuring that there are measures to provide some progress of how their student is kind of advancing through their educational plan. The last piece is really is more of a flag for you all as you're thinking through the processes, specifically at the district level. And that is if a student fails the assessment in the subsequent school year. So this is specifically a student who had previously been in a third grader, a fifth grader, or an eighth grader who had not met at least an achieve. So they were did not meet in their last state assessment. They had an educational plan developed. They participated in kind of some of the activities in that educational plan. The next time they took their assessment, they were still not performing at a satisfactory level. What kind of that triggers then is that committee meeting needs to kind of reconvene to identify the reason as to why that student was not successful, adjust the learning plan, but it also triggers the involvement of the superintendent or a superintendent's designee to come in. And this would be, I think it specifically names that it could be a member of a regional education service center that could serve in that role. It is really a superintendent's decision as to kind of who is going to serve in that role. And it also needs to be somebody who wasn't previously in a member of the Accelerated Learning Committee. So if you think about this as an additional layer of it being escalated to say, we've tried something, it didn't work. What do we need to do? And what do we need to be providing to the student to ensure that we are kind of making those supports a bit more robust and that we have a stronger plan moving into the next school year. So who needs to be a part of these accelerating learning committees? So you're gonna identify that some of these members are members that serve in other committees kind of on a campus. So you want to have a principal or the principal's designee. This could be kind of a principal's discretion. It could be an assistant principal. It could be who they feel is the most appropriate to serve in this role. The student's parent or guardian, the teacher of the subject in which the assessment was taken and the student has failed to achieve at least approaches. So assessment in which they did not meet that performance level. And so if that committee is meeting on various different subjects, you will want to note that is also going to increase the number of teachers that would be involved in this accelerated learning committee, because the conversations around what is the educational plan would need to take into account all of the subjects that need to be addressed. And then the last piece is if a student, and this is just kind of referring back to, you want to make sure that you have, if a student fails again in one of those subjects, the committee would reconvene with kind of the escalation of the additional members, meaning superintendent or superintendent designee that I just talked about. The frequently asked question that I'm going to highlight in the next slide is really around where do admission review and dismissal committees come into play for students that are served through the special education program at the district level. And that is that for those students who are both a student served through special education as well as a student who did not meet satisfactory performance on a state assessment, the admission review and dismissal committee, or the ARD committee, is going to add that to the discussions that they're having in their ARD. So the ARD committee then serves as the place where they're actually going to develop that educational plan. It's also to reduce some of the duplication of effort. They are also already having conversations about their individual education plan. So this is a good opportunity to really kind of ensure that those criteria are met on both sides, and that you can clearly see what are the services, what are the supports, additional modifications or accommodations that the student needs in order to have them be successful the next time that they were to participate in a state assessment. So again, we just wanted to reiterate the headline here is for those students that are identified both as being part of being served through special education and needing to have an educational plan because they have not been successful on a state assessment, is that the Admission Review and Dismissal Committee acts as that accelerated learning committee. So for anyone that is not served through special education, then those students would have to have their educational plans developed through their accelerated learning committee that would be separate from an ART committee. Before I go to the next section, Mega, anything around accelerated learning committees that we wanted to address right now?
We had a lot of questions come through about the overlap with special education, which I believe Lizette just addressed. Do let us know if you have further questions on that front. But I think that was really the main theme. I also wonder, Lizette and Monica, if you two could restate the difference in the applicable grade levels for ALCs versus, and I know we're getting to this piece, accelerated instruction, because I'm continuing to see just a few questions on that in the chat.
Yeah, happy to. So accelerated learning committees are required for 3 grade levels: grade 3, grade 5, and grade 8. It is required for the subjects of math and reading. And so math and reading for students in 3, 5, and 8 that have not been successful on those state assessments require that an education plan is developed in an accelerated learning committee. So that is, when you're thinking about the ALC, it's the scope is limited to grades 3, 5, and 8, math and reading.
And I'm also seeing a few questions in here about whether this includes 504 students and 504 committees as well. And we can follow up with more clarity on that, unless there's a comment here on that, Lizette and Monica.
Yeah, I suspected that 504 might be a question that was coming in, as well as LPAC. Because we don't necessarily have representation on our call, I would want to kind of reconvene internally and ensure that we have the most, I would say the most robust and helpful responses. So we will include those in some guidance in the FAQ.
I think that covers it for a lot of the ALC specific questions that are coming up.
Great. Let's move to accelerated instruction requirements. And again, this is, I think, a good place to talk about like who needs accelerated instruction. So we just identified who needs an educational plan through the Accelerated Learning Committee. Who needs accelerated instruction? Accelerated instruction is going to be required of any student that is in a tested grade, so that participates in STAR grades 3 through 8, or any student that participates in an EOC at the high school level. If they have been unsuccessful on any of those assessments, then they require accelerated instruction. So if you think about it, there could be some overlap there. There's could be students that are going to require an accelerated learning committee that are also going to require accelerated instruction. On the flip side of that, there's going to be students that require accelerated instruction, but do not require that an educational plan is developed through the accelerated learning committee process. And so I want to just, the accelerated instruction requirements, and that is a much broader pool of students that actually it applies to. So once you have identified that there are students that need accelerated instruction, so this again would be a district and a campus identifying who those students are, what grades they're in, and what subjects would actually be necessary for them to get accelerated instruction in. Then they would actually be kind of identifying what is the decision that we need to make when we think about the options that we can consider for this student. Option 1 is that they could assign the student to a teacher who is a certified teacher and is a master exemplary or recognized teacher for the subsequent school year in the applicable subject area. If you are a district who does not have kind of those designations through the teacher incentive allotment, you could support a teacher to be at a recognized designation by helping them pursue and complete the national board certification. You could also have a teacher that has come to you from a district that had teacher incentive allotment, already held that designation, and that's kind of carrying over to your district. And we are going to be going into much more depth on accelerated instruction and kind of the designation in webinar 2, which is next week. And that is why Grace Wu is here to kind of identify what are the questions that are being asked so that she can better prepare for the webinar next week. Our Director of Texas Tutoring Supports, Colby Self, which might be on the call as well, but he is also going to be a presenter and kind of leading some of the facilitation next week to talk about how tutoring, which I'll get to in a second, is going to help districts really meet some of these requirements of House Bill 4545. So once you've identified kind of the option 1 path, and I think Dr. Ruiz-Mills talked about parents and guardians may request a particular classroom teacher if more than one is available. But the right there is really around the request, not necessarily like granting that request. And so you'll want to ensure that there are policies in place for how parents actually go about making that request of a classroom teacher. The second option, which I will say is likely going to be where many districts fall if option 1 is not a viable option, is that students receive at least 30 hours of supplemental instruction, i.e. tutoring. All right, and so being able to actually participate in tutoring. So when we think about option 2 and we think about supplemental instruction and tutoring, what is required for it to actually meet the criteria of accelerated instruction? So here are the requirements for all grades. It must be targeted instruction that is TEKS aligned, and it must be supplemental to the normal instruction that that student is already provided. And the dosage of that must be a minimum of 30 hours in the subsequent school year or in the summer. And if it's provided in the summer, then you will have the opportunity to kind of roll it into the fall. But if it's during the school year and doesn't fall in the summer, then it's going to have to be a minimum of 30 hours total. And that must occur. The frequency must be at least once per week. The purpose of this is really to help that student have the additional instructional time, the additional supplemental instruction to get them at being able to achieve kind of satisfactory performance the next time that they participate in a state assessment. When you're thinking about developing the group size for accelerated instruction, you really want to ensure that you are planning for a 1-to-3 ratio. Anything above 3 students will require parent consent for you to provide tutoring in a larger group size. So anything above 3 will require parent consent. We are going to be sharing parent templates, parent communications, additional resources for parent communications in a subsequent webinar. So just know that that is kind of what our team is currently working on. The last 2 pieces are really important, and we are really thinking about this through our Texas Tutoring Support team, and that is you want to ensure that your tutors are specifically trained on the instructional materials that you are using. They need to be trained on the high quality instructional materials that are TEKS aligned, that are supplemental to the normal instruction, so that you know that the quality of the tutoring is really, you're holding a high bar for that quality, and that the school district actually has some oversight on what is the consistency, what is the quality of the tutoring that's being provided by these tutors. And then the last piece is going back to the importance of relationships, and that is that the assignment of those tutors really be consistent. And so it is provided by one person for that student for the entirety of that student supplemental instruction period. We know that there might be some fluctuation, and that's why it says to the extent possible. And so when you're thinking about the development of those systems, it's always shooting for what is the best practice. And then if you need to make adjustments as kind of different circumstances arise, that is fine, but really planning for it to be a consistent tutor that student is developing relationships with, so that you can actually see the student starting to make more progress. When that tutoring provided is also really identified or spelled out in House Bill 4545, because that accelerated instruction needs to be provided in a time that it's not removing a student from kind of foundational core curriculum or enrichment curriculum or recess and physical activity. And so you might be thinking to yourself, well, what does that mean? When are we providing this instruction? And it is going to require a significant amount of planning. And that is why we've started these webinars as soon as possible, even though it falls so close to the 4th of July holiday, because it is going to take some time to really think through master scheduling and staffing patterns. If students cannot be removed from any curriculum that's provided to them that's provided to also other students in that grade level, we're going to need to be really creative in identifying when during the school day or when before and after school can we provide accelerated instruction that still falls within kind of some of these parameters and guardrails that have been outlined in 4545. So to help with master scheduling, we are providing some of those resources. We'll touch on them a little bit during webinar 2, but those master scheduling examples and additional support and resources is going to be provided through our Texas tutoring team and our tutoring webinars that are going to be kind of continuing to happen throughout the summer. So just know that we are wanting to be responsive to those needs as well, so that you all are prepared and supported as you're thinking about next fall. So previewing a little bit of what the TEA is currently working on when we're thinking about high impact tutoring that meets the criteria of House Bill 4545, I wanted to identify what are some of the key attributes of high impact tutoring. And these key attributes are a well-trained, consistent tutor that's also outlined, right? When thinking about being able to identify the person that is going to serve as the tutor through the entirety of the accelerated instruction that's being provided, ensuring that there's high quality instructional materials, the small group size of 1 to 3 maximum, that it's embedded into the school day or immediately after, before or after, so that students actually have, we're maximizing their access and you're not having to think about all the things like transportation, that it's provided at least 3 sessions per week, 30 minutes minimum. And this is really more high dosage, right? Because if you think about the kind of the minimums, we know that we want districts to, because of House Bill 4545, you want to meet the minimums. We're in tutoring are really going to try to help you get it high dosage, because if we can get it high dosage, we can actually ensure that we are best positioned to see the level of progress. And so in 2020, there were several studies about the impact of high quality and high impact tutoring. And that found that if those tutoring programs were delivered with these key attributes, that you saw students really making up to about 5 months of additional progress. And so we know that as we're kind of looking at data, that additional growth of 5 months would be so helpful to many of our students. And so we want to ensure that we're setting you all up to really be successful and really be able to deliver on this high impact and potentially even high dosage tutoring. The last key attribute is data driven. So ensuring that as you're thinking about the scheduling, you're thinking about the partnerships or the identification of who's going to serve as that tutor, that you're really being, that you're using those opportunities to like bring in some data, also provide you an opportunity to make some mid-course corrections, identify what's working, identify what tweaks you might need to be making to your program along the way. To best support you with that, this is going to really be the content of our next webinar, webinar 2, which is really a deep dive on accelerated instruction. TEA is providing districts with some options. And it's really about 3 different approaches. The first approach is TEA has supports, materials, and resources to support districts that want to build it themselves. And what we mean by building them themselves is that they're going to design their program, they're going to use their own curriculum, and they're potentially going to use their own tutors, right? Current staff, maybe paraprofessionals, current teachers, maybe current volunteers that they already have. And so this is going to be where the LEA is really designing it from the ground up. To support that, we have the statewide webinar series that we conducted. Those recordings are on our website. We have the High Impact Tutoring Toolkit. Version 1 is already posted. We see that that's going to be updated throughout the year. And so you can expect that that's going to continue to evolve as the year goes on. And then the last piece is the High Impact Tutoring Workshop Series. That's an opportunity to be a part of a small cohort of districts that are in the process of building their program. So you not only do you have that facilitated by us, right? Thinking about all the decisions that need to be made over a 4-week period of time, but it also provides you with a network of folks that are also in that same situation that you could then use as a community of practice. So that is one option. The second option that TEA will provide you with is a pre-approved list. And this is really a clearinghouse of full service organizations who can come in and provide all of the tutoring components that you might need, meaning these providers would have the tutoring curriculum. They would be able to support you in how that tutoring is going to be delivered, as well as many of these full service have their own tutors that can work virtually or in person. We'll also have a separate list that's more of a limited list of staffing support. So when you think about a list of pre-approved providers that can help you with the sourcing of tutors, meaning individuals, right? And so that's where we're going to have a list, because finding tutors is going to be something that we believe that will be a really big need for our districts across the state. So we'll be providing those two lists for you, and we're hoping to have those posted by the second week of July. The third option, which is also coming soon, and we're currently getting that finalized, is the use of our vetted Texas Tutor Corps. This is more of the full package. We will be providing TEA subsidized curriculum, high quality curriculum. We are going to be providing the training on that curriculum, also on the best practices, and we'll be able to either train your own tutors on using these materials, or we can actually connect you with folks that can give you the individual tutors that we will then train. Additionally, all of these instructional materials would be loaded into a platform that can be used for in-person or virtual tutoring. And so TEA is really going to be absorbing a lot of that cost for you. Any additional costs could also be applied for via our T-Class grant. So that would be an additional subsidy that's included in our Texas COVID Learning Acceleration Support Grant, which will be released in July. The vetted Texas Tutor Corps is kind of, I would say it's a subsidized high quality package that meets the requirements of House Bill 4545 for grades 3 through 8 in math and reading. We will provide guidance for anything outside of that. So our Q&A here, and this is the one that Mega asked earlier, is how should we categorize students who did not take the STAR test in the spring? Should they automatically be categorized as a student requiring accelerated instruction? So prior law required LEAs to provide accelerated instructions to any student who did not perform satisfactorily. And this part of the law didn't change. And it indicates that students who were absent or otherwise do not have a valid assessment and did not perform, so therefore if they don't have an assessment, they did not perform satisfactorily, they are required to receive accelerated instruction. So that we know that last year, 2021, was a very different year for all of us. And so there was a commissioner and a gubernatorial waiver that was offered that really altered what that assessment requirement and that framework was. So as a result, this gives LEAs some flexibility on how this is going to be kind of implemented. And that is, a school system could administer an assessment that is actually designated to show grade level proficiency on the TEKS. Something that could be used as like the beginning of the year optional STAR. They could then use the assessment results from that TEKS aligned assessment to then make a decision. If that student performs satisfactorily, the school district could decide that that student then does not require accelerated instruction. If they do not, then that student the district would want to plan, because they actually would have some assessment results reflected for that student, and they would want to plan to provide accelerated instruction for that student in the 21-22 school year. The next question is around summer. So this summer, so summer 2021, if the question is, if we believe that our LEA delivered or will deliver sufficient accelerated instruction in the summer, how do we determine whether that acceleration instruction meets House Bill 4545 requirements going into school year 21-22? And the answer to that is really district will want to review what that accelerated instruction in the summer looks like and comparing that to the requirements of accelerated instruction as it's outlined in 4545. What I mean is a review of what is the instruction that is being provided. Is it TEKS aligned? Is it grade level? Is it supplemental to the normal instruction that is happening? Is it being provided in a small group? So think about that 1-to-3 ratio. Is it being provided by a consistent tutor? So all of those requirements that I outlined a couple of slides before on slide 17, you will want to review your summer programming compared to those requirements to make that decision. Mega, what else do we have for accelerated instruction?
So we have a few folks looking for clarification on the teacher types that meet the teacher assignment requirement. So wondering if perhaps Monica or Grace Wu on the line would be able to jump in and just clarify here.
Great. So Mega, I believe the question is, what does it mean to be a master, an exemplary, or recognized teacher? And so I think there may be some confusion out there because there was a master teacher certification that was phased out through House Bill 3 in the last legislative session. And so when we refer to master, exemplary, and recognized, we are referring to the designations that are issued through a local designation system, or if a teacher holds a national board certification. So these, all designations are tied with the teacher incentive allotment.
Great. And then we had one additional clarifying question that came up about whether if a district meets a parent request for teacher assignment, do they actually meet the HB 4545 requirement? And my sense is that actually you would still need to meet the specific teacher assignment requirement in HB 4545, and simply meeting the parent request does not actually meet that requirement. But Grace, please jump in and clarify here as well. Or Monica and Lizette.
Yeah, they would, go ahead, Grace. No, go ahead.
Please, after you, Lizette.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah, they'll want to go in and look, like the assignment of a student is one of those options that they could consider. That's also assuming that the instruction that's being provided to the student is meeting kind of some of those requirements. Grace, anything that you would want to add to that or clarify?
No, Lizette.
And then we have one other frequent question here about what the requirement is in terms of accelerate or the supplemental instruction if a student fails or does not pass more than one test. So say they do not pass math and reading.
Yeah, so the accelerated instruction requirement is a minimum of 30 hours total per subject. And so if you do have a student that has that requires accelerated instruction in multiple subjects, that the minimum hours provided to that student would be increased. So it would be 30 hours total minimum per subject.
And then I believe you both spoke to this a little bit earlier, but another frequent question coming up is what the bar is for did not pass. So wonder if you could provide just a little bit more clarification there.
Yep. So if we think about the performance, kind of the performance thresholds on a state assessment, you have does not, did not meet, approaches, meets, and masters. Anyone that's at did not meet would require accelerated instruction. So meeting approaches is that is those students then are not required to receive accelerated instruction. It is really looking at those students that did not meet that performance level.
And then we also have a question here just about the permission, whether there's flexibility to go beyond sort of that 3-to-1 ratio for students. And I believe this is addressed in the FAQ as well, that written permission from parents needs to be sought if districts are looking to go beyond that 3 student to 1 tutor ratio. and that there's not a TEA waiver that is available for that particular piece. Lizette, Monica, anything to add there?
Yes, we will also be drafting some documents to provide support that districts can provide to parents if they agree to going through more than the 3-to-1 ratio.
Appreciate you sharing that, Monica, because we've also had a few questions come through about interest in templates and resources. And I believe you're both about to speak to that now. So perfect segue, pass it back to both of you.
Thank you. So we can go ahead and preview our upcoming webinars and supports that we'll be offering. So our webinar on July 7th, which is next week, will be on the accelerated instruction requirements. We'll do a deep dive into that. We'll include tutoring. We'll also have conversations regarding master teachers and the teacher incentive allotment. And on July 20th, we'll discuss the accelerated learning committees and the parent engagement. That's where we'll provide some sample protocols and documentation. Also, we're going to be scheduling a 4th webinar, and that's really going to be based on what your needs are as an LEA. So whatever you want to discuss in that 4th webinar or you need additional guidance on, please feel free to send us an email, but we'll talk through the accelerated learning resources as well. And if you have any documents that you would like to share, I think on the next slide is our contact information. And we can go to that. You can email them at the accelerated learning or the accelerated.instruction website or email address that you'll see here shortly. Did we have a couple of questions on here at the end? There we go. There we go. So the accelerated.instruction@tea.texas.gov. Feel free to share your documents there. We also have our FAQ document posted, and we have a web page. It's the accelerated instruction page where you'll be able to find resources and recordings of the webinar in addition to the templates, and the House Bill 4545 legislation is also on there.
Yeah,
Megan?
and I was just gonna say, like, I wanted to make sure that we noted that, because we still have, I think, additional clarification is needed around what is the threshold. And so did not pass means that they did not achieve approaches, meets, or masters. And that includes students that did not test. The way that you can kind of a path that you could potentially utilize for those that did not test is to administer a TEKS aligned assessment, something like the beginning of the year optional STAR, so that then you do have some data to make some decisions around how to proceed. So if they did not test and a district is choosing not to administer any type of TEKS aligned assessment, at the start of the school year to make that decision, then that student needs to be included in the accelerated instruction requirements. So I just wanted to make sure that we had that level of clarity for folks. And then Monica, I will let you I think you were going to say one other thing.
No, that was correct. Thank you. Any additional questions?
Seeing a couple questions here asking if a teacher does not have any teachers in the teacher incentive allotment program, how do they proceed? And I think even a broader question around if you don't have teachers that would meet that teacher assignment requirement in HB 4545, how to proceed. I believe the answer here is that you would pursue sort of that second option around supplemental instruction to meet the requirement. Lizette, Monica, do you want to jump in here? Anything to add there?
Yeah, no, that is correct. That is correct. So we realize that there's likely not going to be many districts that can actually, where option one is actually a viable option for them. I think there is, Grace can talk about how they could potentially get there. But for the most part, many will have to utilize option 2, which is providing that accelerated instruction to that student. And that is where I think the tutoring supports that we have coming out from the agency could really support that. Another question that I saw is around kind of the minimum hours for accelerated instruction when it comes to which subjects. So it is all subjects in which the student was not successful in the state assessment. So that does include science and social studies. The difference here is that I think we clarified earlier who is required to have an educational plan that's developed through an accelerated learning committee. The accelerated learning committee limits the grades. So it's 3, 5, and 8, and it limits the subject. Those are only for math and reading. But for accelerated instruction, there are more grades that applies to and more subjects that applies to. Yeah, and good flag from Julie. That also includes writing. So, for accelerated instruction. Thanks, Julie.
And I will just note that we have a lot of really good questions coming through. We certainly cannot do justice to all of those questions in this conversation. We can commit to really working on some good answers for all of you and additional resources on some of these questions rather than trying to squeeze them all in right now.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm glad that Dr. Ruiz-Mills noted this contact information. Please email us, continue to email us questions. That is really the way that we can provide you with an FAQ document that can be helpful, very helpful for you. We will continue to add to that FAQ document, and you will find that FAQ document on this accelerated instruction page. So this accelerated instruction, when we post these slides, that is a link to our page, but you can also get through our page already through the instructional continuity. So many of y'all are already familiar with the instructional continuity page. There's actually a new card that says accelerated instruction. When you click on that card, it takes you to the accelerated instruction page. And that is where you can find the most current information that we can share, both about registering for webinars and viewing past webinars. With that, thank you for all of your questions. I would say this is probably the liveliest webinar that I've ever participated in. So thank you all for making the time for us. Thank you to the team that joined today so that we could best support answering as many questions as we can. And so please be on the lookout for those frequently asked questions to be added to what's already there right now. So there are some already there. Thank you. Have a great July 4th. We hope that you're enjoying some of the summer before we get started in the fall. So thank you all again for joining.